The music from the ballroom below sounded distant now, muffled by stone walls and the thundering of Verity Mercer's own heartbeat. She pressed herself against the cold iron railing of the balcony, chest heaving, fingers trembling as she tried to hold together the torn sleeve of her borrowed gown. She could still feel Lord Bramwell's hands on her shoulders, still smell the port on his breath as he'd cornered her in that alcove, murmuring that Americans understood pleasure in ways these frigid English roses never could, that she should be grateful for his attention. Her palm still stung from where she'd slapped him. The night air bit at her exposed skin, carrying the scent of rain and smoke and London. Verity forced herself to breathe, to think. She'd fled through the first door she could find, up a servant's stair, through a corridor she hadn't recognized, and out onto this balcony that overlooked a private garden rather than the street. Someone's private rooms, someone important, given the silk drapes she'd glimpsed through the glass doors. She needed to leave. She needed to find Neville Crane, the man who'd promised her family he would introduce her properly to society. And she needed to escape this nightmare before— "You're bleeding." The voice came from the shadows near the far end of the balcony, low, precise, carrying the weight of absolute authority. Verity spun, her pulse spiking. A man stepped forward into the moonlight, tall, dark-haired, with a face that seemed carved from the same cold stone as the balustrade. His evening clothes were immaculate, his posture rigid, with a control that suggested he'd been watching her for some time. "Your arm," he clarified, nodding toward her torn sleeve. "There's blood." Verity glanced down. He was right. Bramwell's signet ring had caught her skin when she'd wrenched away. A thin line of crimson stained the cream silk. "It's nothing," she said, hating how her voice wavered. "I apologize for the intrusion. I didn't realize these rooms were occupied. If you'll excuse me, you'll go back inside looking like that." One dark eyebrow lifted fractionally. "With a torn gown, blood on your sleeve, and the look of a woman who's just escaped something unpleasant?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "I don't see how that's any concern of yours." "It becomes my concern when you're standing on my balcony." He moved closer, and Verity fought the urge to step back. "This is Ashworth House, my family's London residence, which means whatever scandal you're fleeing will be traced directly to my doorstep." The name struck her like cold water. Ashworth. Even in Boston she'd heard the name. The Duke of Thornfield, one of the wealthiest and most powerful peers in England. She'd just stumbled onto a duke's private balcony looking like she'd been mauled. "I can explain," she started. "Can you?" His blue eyes held hers, assessing, calculating. "Because from my perspective, I see a young woman I don't recognize, clearly in distress, hiding on my balcony during my grandmother's ball. Society will draw its own conclusions." "Society can go hang." The words escaped before she could stop them. His expression flickered with something that might have been surprise, or might have been the faintest ghost of amusement. "American," he said. It wasn't a question. "Is that a problem?" "That depends entirely on what happens in the next 30 seconds. Before Verity could ask what he meant, the glass doors behind them crashed open. Light spilled onto the balcony, along with voices raised in shock and delight. She turned to see 3 women frozen in the doorway, their fans still raised, their eyes wide with scandalized glee. Behind them, more faces appeared. An older woman in sapphires, 2 young lords craning their necks, a matron whose expression suggested she'd just discovered gold. "Your Grace," the woman in sapphire swept forward. "We heard a commotion and came to investigate. We didn't realize you were entertaining." The emphasis on the word was surgical. Verity became acutely aware of how this looked. Her torn gown exposing her shoulder, the blood on her sleeve, the Duke standing mere feet away, alone with her in the darkness of his private quarters. "The American girl," someone whispered, loud enough to carry. "The one Neville Crane brought. I heard she was wild." "Clearly," another voice tittered. "Look at the state of her." Verity's stomach dropped. They thought that she and the Duke had been. "I wasn't," she started, but the Duke's voice cut through hers like a blade. "Lady Drummond," he said, his tone carrying the bored authority of someone who commanded rooms simply by existing in them. "How fortuitous that you found us. I was just about to send for my sister." The woman in sapphires, Lady Drummond, looked confused. "Your sister? Your Grace?" "Yes. Miss Mercer is a friend of Rowena's from their correspondence. She took ill during the dancing, and I was escorting her to recover in private when she stumbled." He gestured dismissively at her torn gown. "An unfortunate accident with the door handle, I'm afraid. Nothing more dramatic than that." The lie was smooth, effortless, utterly convincing. But the damage was done. Verity could see it in the way Lady Drummond's eyes narrowed, the way the whispers continued behind raised fans. They didn't believe him. Or perhaps they simply didn't care. The story was too delicious. The wild American, discovered in a compromising position with the Duke of Thornfield. By morning, it would be all over London. "How convenient," Lady Drummond said, her smile sharp as glass. "I do hope Miss Mercer recovers quickly. The poor dear looks positively ravaged." The women retreated, but their whispered conversations followed them down the corridor like poison spreading through water. Verity sagged against the railing, her legs threatening to give way. "Why did you do that?" she asked hoarsely. "Why lie for me?" The Duke turned to face her fully, and in the cold moonlight, his expression was unreadable. "Because, Miss Mercer," he said, "you've just solved a problem I've been struggling with for months. I don't understand. You will." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "My grandmother has been parading suitable brides before me since my father's funeral. I've refused them all, and she's grown persistent. But now," he smiled, and it was the smile of a man who just won a game she didn't know she'd been playing. "Now I have you. A scandal. A compromising situation that demands I do the honorable thing." His eyes met hers, blue as a winter sky and twice as cold. "Tomorrow, all of London will believe the Duke of Thornfield is courting the wild American. And you, Miss Mercer, are going to help me make sure they keep believing it." The balcony doors closed behind him, leaving Verity alone with the distant music and the terrible certainty that her life had just changed forever. She just didn't know yet how much. The study was smaller than Verity expected, lined with books and leather, and the lingering scent of tobacco. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the Turkish rug. She stood near the door, arms wrapped around herself, still wearing her ruined gown because no one had offered her an alternative. The Duke, Caius Ashworth, she'd learned from the frantic whispers she'd overheard, sat behind a mahogany desk, studying her with the detached interest of a collector examining a specimen. "Where is Neville Crane?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. "He was supposed to introduce me to society. He was supposed to stay with me the entire evening." "Mr. Crane left approximately 2 hours ago." The Duke's voice betrayed no sympathy. "I'm told he received word of a more lucrative opportunity elsewhere." Verity closed her eyes. Of course Neville had abandoned her. Her brother Prentice had sworn the man was reliable, that he'd successfully launched a dozen American heiresses into London society. But Prentice's judgment had always been questionable, and Neville Crane had taken their mother's money and vanished at the first sign of something better. "He'll be dealt with," the Duke added. "His reputation in certain circles will not survive the week. I don't need you to fight my battles. No, you need me to save your reputation." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Which brings us to the matter at hand. Do you understand what happened on that balcony? I understand that Lord Bramwell assaulted me, and I defended myself. Beyond that, you were discovered alone with me, in obvious distress, with a torn gown, in my private quarters. His tone was clinical. It doesn't matter what actually happened. What matters is what society believes happened. And society believes, Miss Mercer, that you either seduced me or were compromised by me. Either interpretation destroys you. The words landed like stones. That's absurd. That's England? Verity began pacing, her mind racing. Her mother had invested everything in this season, had called in every favor, sold her grandmother's pearls, borrowed against the house in Boston. Also, Verity could make a match that would save them from ruin. And now, before she'd even attended her first proper ball, she was ruined anyway. There must be something I can do, she said. Some way to explain. There is. The Duke rose, moving to stand before the fire, his back to her. You can let them believe you're being courted. By me. Verity stopped pacing. I beg your pardon? My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, has made it her mission to see me married by the end of the season. She has a particular candidate in mind, Lady Lavinia Pembroke. Wealthy, connected, utterly devoid of personality. She's been angling for a proposal since my father's funeral, and my grandmother has been only too happy to encourage her. And you don't want to marry her. I don't want to marry anyone. He turned to face her, and for a moment, something raw flickered behind his controlled expression. Not yet. Not while I'm still managing other matters. But my grandmother won't relent. She's invited Lady Lavinia to every event this season. She's practically announced the engagement without my consent. So find another solution. You're a duke. Surely you can simply refuse. I've been refusing for 6 months. She doesn't listen. He moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. But tonight, you gave me something I couldn't manufacture. A scandal involving someone unsuitable. Someone my grandmother would never approve of. The wild American, Verity said bitterly. Precisely. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. If society believes I'm courting you, my grandmother will be furious. But she can't force me toward Lady Lavinia. The gossip will make that impossible. And by the end of the season, when we've decided we don't suit, you'll slip quietly back to America. I'll mourn the loss appropriately, and everyone will have moved on. And what about my reputation? My family's investment in this season? Your reputation survives because you're being courted by a duke. Any scandal about the balcony becomes romantic instead of sordid. Poor American girl, alone in London, rescued by the handsome peer who's now properly pursuing her. His voice dripped with something like contempt. Society loves a redemption story, especially one they can claim they saw coming. Verity wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that she was exchanging one disaster for another. But what choice did she have? The door burst open before she could answer, and a young woman whirled into the room like a summer storm. Dark-haired, bright-eyed, vibrating with barely contained energy. "Is it true?" she demanded, grabbing Verity's hands before anyone could speak. "You're the one from the balcony? The American everyone's talking about? Oh, this is perfect." "Rowena," the Duke said warningly. "Don't Rowena me." The young woman, his sister clearly, squeezed Verity's fingers. "You have no idea what you've done. Caius has been insufferable for months, brooding, avoiding every function, letting grandmother run roughshod over his entire life. And now you've given him the perfect excuse to escape." "I haven't agreed to anything," Verity said carefully. Rowena's face fell. But you must. It'll be wonderful. You'll stay with us, attend all the best parties, and wear beautiful gowns. Rowena. And grandmother will be absolutely apoplectic, which is reason enough. Rowena. The younger girl stopped, turning to her brother with an injured expression. What? Perhaps let Miss Mercer decide for herself before you plan her entire season. Rowena pouted, but released Verity's hands, stepping back with visible reluctance. The room fell quiet. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. If I do this, Verity said slowly, I have conditions. The Duke's eyebrow lifted. You're negotiating with me. You've made it clear we both need something. That makes us equals, Your Grace, regardless of what your title suggests. She met his gaze without flinching. Do you want to hear my terms? Or shall I take my chances with society's gossip? For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then, impossibly, something like respect flickered in his cold blue eyes. Name them. First, my mother receives letters explaining that I've been taken on as Lady Rowena's companion for the season. Nothing about scandal or arrangements, just a respectable position. Done. Second, my brother Prentice owes debts to several men in London. I want them cleared, quietly, so he doesn't know it was charity. The Duke's expression didn't change. That's more complicated. You want me to play the role of your unsuitable courtship. My family's stability is part of that role. Verity lifted her chin. Third, when this ends, I don't want references for a governess position. I want introductions to merchants, investors, people who can help me establish a business. I didn't come to England to find a husband. I came to find opportunity. Rowena made an impressed sound. The Duke studied her, as if seeing her for the first time. A business, he repeated. Textiles. My father built a small empire before he died. I know the trade. I just need capital and connections. And your fourth condition? When you actually want to marry anyone, whether it's Lady Lavinia or someone else, this ends immediately. No dragging me along while you conduct a real courtship. I won't be made a fool. Silence stretched between them, sharp with tension. Then the Duke extended his hand. You have my word. All four conditions. Verity looked at his outstretched hand, elegant and powerful, and utterly foreign to her world. She thought of her mother, counting coins at the kitchen table. Of Prentice, drinking away his guilt over deals gone wrong. Of the life waiting for her in Boston, growing smaller and darker with each passing year. She took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, sending an unexpected shock through her fingers. We have an agreement, she said. We have an agreement, he confirmed. Welcome to Ashworth House, Miss Mercer. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. Rowena clapped her hands with delight, and somewhere in the depths of the house, a clock struck the hour like a warning bell. The carriage rattled through London's gas-lit streets, carrying Verity toward a life she couldn't quite believe was real. Rowena sat beside her, chattering enthusiastically about dress fittings and morning calls and all the events they'd attend together. The Duke sat across from them, silent as a statue, his gaze fixed on the passing darkness beyond the window. You'll need everything, Rowena was saying. Morning gowns, afternoon dresses, evening wear. At least 4 ball gowns. No, 5. The Marchmont Ball, the Sinclair Rout, Lady Pembroke's musical. Lady Pembroke? Verity interrupted. As in, Lady Lavinia Pembroke? Rowena's expression flickered. Her mother, the Countess. She hosts the most tedious musical of the season every year. Absolutely mandatory attendance. Rowena, the Duke said quietly. Perhaps give Miss Mercer a moment to adjust. She can adjust while I explain the social calendar. It's not as though she can do both separately. But Rowena softened, squeezing Verity's hand. I'm sorry. I overwhelm people. Caius tells me constantly. I tell you occasionally. You ignore me universally. For a moment, something almost like warmth passed between the siblings. Then the carriage turned onto a wide avenue, and Verity's lungs seized. Ashworth House rose before them like a monument to another world. 4 stories of cream-colored stone, columns flanking a massive entrance, windows blazing with light. Servants materialized from nowhere as the carriage stopped, opening doors, offering hands, moving with a choreographed precision that spoke of generations of practice. Welcome to Thornfield's London residence, Rowena said, clearly enjoying Verity's reaction. Wait until you see the estate in Hampshire. This is practically modest by comparison. The entrance hall alone was larger than Verity's entire house in Boston. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. Portraits of stern-faced Ashworths watched from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to follow her with aristocratic disapproval. She didn't belong here. The knowledge settled into her bones like winter cold. The Amber Guest Suite, the Duke told the housekeeper, a severe woman whose expression revealed nothing. Miss Mercer will require a lady's maid. Of course, Your Grace. The housekeeper's gaze flicked to Verity, taking in the torn gown, the disheveled hair, the blood that had dried to rust on her sleeve. If she was curious, she didn't show it. Right away, a young maid appeared, curtsying low. If you'll follow me, miss. Verity turned back to the Duke and Rowena, suddenly uncertain. She should say something, thank them, ask questions, assert her independence. But the weight of the evening pressed down on her, and all she could manage was, "Good night." Rowena pulled her into an impulsive embrace. "It's going to be wonderful," she whispered. "You'll see." The Duke simply nodded, his expression giving nothing away. But as Verity followed the maid up the sweeping staircase, she felt his eyes on her back, watching until she disappeared around the corner. The Amber Guest Suite was aptly named. Warm golden tones dominated every surface, from the silk hangings of the 4-poster bed to the damask wallpaper to the velvet drapes framing windows that overlooked a private garden. A fire already crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across a writing desk, a chaise longue, a wardrobe large enough to hold a small army's worth of clothing. Verity stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, trying to comprehend that this was where she would live for the next several months. "I'm Nell, miss." The maid, young, red-haired, with kind eyes, was already laying out nightclothes. "I've been assigned as your lady's maid for the season. If there's anything you need, anything at all, you've only to ask." "Thank you, Nell." Verity's voice came out strange, thick with emotions she couldn't name. "That's very kind." Nell helped her out of the ruined gown, clucking sympathetically at the torn sleeve and the scratch on Verity's arm. She brought warm water for washing, a salve for the wound, a cup of tea with honey that she must have sent for while Verity wasn't paying attention. "The house can be overwhelming at first," Nell said softly as she brushed out Verity's hair. "All these rules about where to walk and when to speak and which fork to use. But Lady Rowena is lovely, and his Grace, well, he's been different since his father passed, but he's fair. Never cruel, not like some." "How did his father die?" Verity asked, watching Nell's reflection in the mirror. The maid's hand stilled for just a moment. "A hunting accident, miss. 6 months ago. His Grace was in London when it happened. Took him 2 days to reach Hampshire, and by then—" She shook her head. "He's not been the same since. Barely leaves his study, refuses every invitation. The Dowager Duchess has been beside herself trying to bring him back to society." Verity thought of the Duke's cold control, The way he held himself like a man bracing against an invisible wind. The way he'd said he wasn't ready to marry. Not yet. Not while I'm still managing other matters. Grief. He was still managing grief. "Will that be all, miss?" Nell set down the brush, stepping back. "Yes. Thank you, Nell. For everything." The maid curtsied and slipped away, leaving Verity alone in the golden room. She should sleep. Tomorrow would bring challenges she couldn't even imagine. The Dowager Duchess. The whispers of society. The complicated dance of pretending to be courted by a man who looked at her like she was a necessary inconvenience. But sleep felt impossible. Instead, Verity moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Below, the garden was silver and shadow in the moonlight. Beyond it, London sprawled in endless gaslit darkness, a city of strangers and secrets, and opportunities she'd crossed an ocean to find. She'd come here to save her family, to find investors, make connections, build something from the ashes of her father's legacy. She'd never intended to get tangled up with dukes and scandals and fake courtships, but here she was. And tomorrow, she would face the woman who, according to Nell, ran this house like a general runs a battlefield. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Verity crossed to the door, expecting Nell with forgotten tea or additional blankets. Instead, she found Rowena, wrapped in a dressing gown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," Rowena said. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. Truly all right. Not just the polite version." Verity hesitated. "I'm overwhelmed, but I'll manage." "You will." Rowena's smile was warm. "You're tougher than you look. I could tell from the moment I saw you. You're not one of these wilting English flowers who needs rescuing. You're a survivor." My father used to say that. Before he died. Then he was wise. Rowena reached out, squeezing her hand. "I know this is strange. I know my brother is difficult. But I'm glad you're here, Verity. It's been so quiet since Father died. Caius barely speaks. Grandmother lectures constantly. Having you here feels like finally opening a window in a house that's been sealed shut for too long." Verity's throat tightened unexpectedly. "I'm not sure your grandmother will agree." Rowena laughed, low and conspiratorial. "Oh, she absolutely won't. She'll despise you on principle, the wild American who's disrupting all her careful plans. But that's precisely why it's going to be so delicious." She squeezed Verity's hand once more, then slipped back into the hallway with a whispered, "Sleep well." The door clicked shut. Verity stood there for a long moment, caught between terror and something that felt dangerously like hope. Then she climbed into the massive bed, sinking into sheets softer than anything she'd ever felt, and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally claimed her. Her last thought before sleep was of the Duke's eyes in the firelight, cold and calculating and haunted. And the strange certainty that behind all that control, something was breaking. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, the Dowager Duchess. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through amber silk curtains and the quiet efficiency of a household that had been running smoothly for generations. Verity woke disoriented, momentarily uncertain where she was, until the events of the previous night crashed back into her awareness like a wave against rocks. The balcony, Lord Bramwell, the Duke, the arrangement. Nell appeared with tea and toast before Verity had even fully sat up, moving with the practiced grace of someone who'd anticipated needs before they were spoken. "Lady Rowena has sent up a morning dress," Nell said, gesturing toward a gown of soft sage green draped over the chaise. "She said you're approximately the same size, and it should serve until the modiste arrives this afternoon." "The modiste?" "Madame Fontaine. She's the most sought-after dressmaker in London. Lady Rowena sent word first thing this morning." Nell smiled. "She's quite excited about the prospect of a complete wardrobe, miss. I believe she used the word transformation." Verity wasn't sure she wanted to be transformed, but she allowed Nell to help her dress, to arrange her hair in a style that felt foreign and elegant, to prepare her for whatever awaited downstairs. The breakfast room was bright with morning sun and the scent of coffee and fresh bread. Rowena sat at a long table, practically bouncing with energy despite the early hour. Beside her was an empty chair. At the head of the table sat a woman who made Verity's blood run cold. The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield was not what she'd expected. She'd imagined frailty, perhaps. White hair and a hunched back, and the softening that came with advanced age. Instead, the woman before her was tall, silver-haired but straight-backed, with the same piercing blue eyes as her grandson. She wore black silk that somehow managed to look regal rather than mournful, and her posture suggested she'd been judging people since before Verity's grandparents were born. "Ah," the Dowager said, setting down her teacup with deliberate precision. "The American." Verity curtsied, grateful for the lessons her mother had insisted upon before she left Boston. "Your Grace, thank you for your hospitality." "My hospitality was not offered. It was assumed by my grandson, who seems to have forgotten that I am the mistress of this household." The Dowager's gaze swept over her, missing nothing. "Sit. Eat. You'll need your strength for what's coming." Verity sat, though her appetite had vanished entirely. "Grandmother," Rowena started, but the Dowager silenced her with a single raised finger. "You will refrain from interfering while I assess this situation." She returned her attention to Verity. "My grandson informs me that you are a friend of Rowena's from correspondence, that you took ill during last evening's entertainment and required assistance. That is the story we've agreed upon, Your Grace." The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "You admit it's a fabrication? Would you prefer I lie to you directly? I was under the impression you valued honesty over flattery." Silence fell over the breakfast table like a blade. Rowena made a strangled sound. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked with metronomic precision. Then, impossibly, the Dowager laughed. It was a sharp sound, more surprised than amused, but genuine nonetheless. "You have backbone, girl. Foolish backbone, but backbone all the same." She leaned forward, her expression growing serious. "You will accompany me to the conservatory after breakfast. Alone. There are matters we need to discuss that are not suitable for Rowena's ears. Grandmother. Rowena." The younger girl subsided, shooting Verity an apologetic look that did nothing to calm her racing thoughts. The conservatory was a glass-walled room at the rear of Ashworth House, filled with tropical plants and the humid warmth of a summer that hadn't yet arrived outside. The Dowager settled into a wrought-iron chair and gestured for Verity to take the one opposite. "Now," she said, "tell me who you really are. Not the story, the truth." Verity considered resistance, deflection, and the careful half-truths that might protect her, but something in the Dowager's expression suggested that deception would be both futile and unwise. So she told the truth. She spoke of her father's textile business, built from nothing over 30 years, destroyed in a single season by a partner who embezzled everything and fled to the continent. She spoke of her mother's quiet determination, selling heirlooms and taking in boarders to keep them afloat. Of Prentice, her brother, drowning his guilt in schemes that never quite worked and debts that kept mounting. Of her own dreams of rebuilding what her father had lost, if only she could find the right connections, the right opportunities. "I didn't come to England to find a husband," she finished. "I came to find investors. People who might take a chance on an American woman with knowledge and ambition, but no capital. The dowager listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Verity finally finished, silence hung between them like smoke. "You're poor," the dowager said at last. "Educated beyond your station, clearly. Ambitious in ways that are unseemly for a woman. And now you've entangled yourself with my grandson in a scheme to avoid his responsibilities." "He came to me with the scheme, Your Grace. I merely negotiated terms." "So I've heard." The dowager rose, moving to the glass wall overlooking the garden. "Do you know how my son died, Miss Mercer?" The question caught Verity off guard. "A hunting accident. That's what I was told." That's what everyone was told. The dowager's voice carried no emotion, but her knuckles were white where they gripped her walking stick. What they weren't told is that Caius was supposed to be with him that day. They'd planned a hunt together, father and son, to discuss estate matters and Caius's future. But Caius received word of a business opportunity in London, something urgent, something that couldn't wait. He sent his regrets and left his father to hunt alone. Verity's stomach tightened. The accident happened 3 hours after Caius departed. A spooked horse, a fall, a broken neck. By the time word reached London, my son had been dead for nearly a day. The dowager turned, her blue eyes blazing with something between grief and accusation. Caius blames himself, believes that if he'd been there, if he'd stayed as planned, he might have prevented it. He's been punishing himself ever since, burying himself in work, refusing joy, refusing connection, refusing to live. That's why he won't marry. He won't marry because he believes he doesn't deserve happiness. Because the last time he chose business over family, it cost him everything. The dowager moved closer, her presence suddenly overwhelming. And now, you appear. A convenient scandal, a ready excuse to avoid the future I've been trying to build for him. You give him another way to hide. Or, Verity said carefully, I give him time. The dowager stopped. Explain. You want him to marry Lady Lavinia Pembroke. But if he marries while he's still drowning in guilt, what kind of husband will he be? What kind of marriage will that create? Verity stood, meeting the older woman's gaze directly. I'm not trying to trap your grandson. I have no illusions about my place in his world. But if this arrangement gives him space to grieve, to heal, to become ready for whatever comes next, isn't that worth something? For a long moment, the dowager simply stared at her. You remind me of his mother, she said finally. The same foolish boldness, the same insistence on speaking truth to power. She shook her head slowly. Caius's mother was not suitable either. A minor baron's daughter, with more wit than wealth. I opposed the match with everything I had. And I was wrong. The words seemed to cost her something. They were happy, deliriously, irritatingly happy, until a fever took her when Rowena was just a child. My son never recovered from the loss. He never remarried, never even considered it. I told him it was wasteful devotion, but now. She trailed off, something softening in her severe expression. Now, I wonder if perhaps love is worth more than suitability, worth more than connections and wealth, and all the things I spent my life believing mattered most. Verity didn't know what to say. I won't pretend to approve of this arrangement, the dowager continued, her voice hardening again. You're unsuitable in every way that matters. Society will mock you. Lady Lavinia's family will work to destroy you. And if you hurt my grandson, if you give him hope only to abandon him when something better appears, I will ensure you never find opportunity in England or anywhere else. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Your Grace. Good. The dowager moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Miss Mercer. You called yourself a survivor earlier. Prove it. Because the wolves of London society make Lord Bramwell look like a lamb, and they've already scented blood. She swept from the conservatory, leaving Verity alone with the tropical plants and the terrible weight of understanding. The Duke wasn't just avoiding marriage, he was drowning in guilt, and she had no idea if she could help him or if she'd only make everything worse. Madame Fontaine arrived at 2 o'clock with an army of assistants, bolts of fabric, and an air of authority that suggested she'd dressed queens and found them wanting. "American," she said, circling Verity with narrowed eyes. "Good bones, excellent posture. Coloring is acceptable." She pinched the fabric of Rowena's borrowed dress with evident disdain. "This will not do. We start from nothing." What followed was the most exhausting 4 hours of Verity's life. She was measured in places she hadn't known could be measured. She was draped in silks and satins, muslins and velvets, each fabric held against her skin, and either approved with a curt nod or rejected with a dismissive wave. Colors were debated with the intensity of military strategy. The deep amber that brought warmth to her complexion, the midnight blue that made her eyes striking, the ivory and gold that Madame Fontaine declared would be the dress for whatever major event was deemed most important. Through it all, Rowena provided commentary, enthusiastic and occasionally contradicted by Madame Fontaine, with withering precision. "She'll need something bold for the Marchmont ball," Rowena insisted. "Something that makes a statement." "Statement," Madame Fontaine repeated, as if the word offended her. "American women make too many statements. What Miss Mercer needs is elegance, restraint. Let her beauty speak, not her clothing." "But, Lady Rowena, you hired me for my expertise. Allow me to use it." By the time the modiste and her assistants departed, leaving behind a schedule of fittings and a promise of gowns arriving within the week, Verity could barely stand. "That was wonderful," Rowena declared, collapsing onto a settee with theatrical exhaustion. "You're going to look absolutely stunning. Lady Lavinia won't know what hit her." "Is Lady Lavinia the enemy I should be worried about?" Verity asked, settling into a chair across from her. "Your grandmother made it sound like all of London society would be coming for me." Rowena's expression flickered. Grandmother tends toward the dramatic, but she's not entirely wrong. She sat up, tucking her legs beneath her. "Lady Lavinia has been angling for Caius since before Father died. Her mother, the Countess of Pembroke, is one of Grandmother's oldest friends. They've had an understanding, unspoken but very real, that Lavinia would become the next Duchess of Thornfield. And now I've disrupted that understanding. Spectacularly," Rowena grinned. "Which is why I adore you already. But Lavinia won't take this quietly. She's beautiful and clever and absolutely vicious when crossed. She'll try to destroy you socially before the season is halfway done." Verity absorbed this information with a calm she didn't entirely feel. "Then I'll have to make sure she doesn't succeed. That's the spirit." Rowena leaned forward conspiratorially. "Now, tell me about yourself. The real you, not the story we're telling everyone else. Where did you grow up? Do you have any terrible secrets? Have you ever been in love?" The questions came rapid fire, and despite herself, Verity found herself answering. She spoke of Boston, of the harbor, and the ships, and the merchants who'd been her father's friends before fortune turned against them. She spoke of learning the textile trade at her father's knee, of understanding fabric and quality and negotiation before she understood social niceties. She spoke of her mother's quiet strength and Prentice's endless optimism and the small house that had once been filled with laughter and now echoed with worry. "And love?" Rowena pressed. "Surely there was someone." Verity hesitated. "There was a young man, a merchant's son like me. We had an understanding, unofficial, but real. Then Father's business collapsed, and suddenly his family decided he could do better. He abandoned you? He made a practical choice. Verity kept her voice even, though the memory still stung. Love is a luxury for people who can afford it. I learned that lesson early. Rowena's expression softened. That's terribly sad. It's realistic, Verity shrugged. I didn't come to England looking for romance, Rowena. I came looking for opportunity. Your brother's arrangement gives me access to people and connections I never could have reached otherwise. When it ends, I'll have what I need to build something lasting. That's worth more than any fairy tale. Before Rowena could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. A footman appeared, bowing slightly. His Grace requests Miss Mercer's presence in the library, my lady. Verity and Rowena exchanged glances. Go, Rowena said, her eyes bright with curiosity. But tell me everything afterward. The library was on the ground floor, tucked away in a corner of the house that felt older, more settled than the rest. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with volumes, the scent of leather and paper, and something faintly like cedar. The Duke stood by a window, his back to her, silhouetted against the fading afternoon light. He didn't turn when she entered, though he must have heard the door. "Close it behind you," he said. She did, suddenly aware of how intimate the space felt, how isolated. My grandmother spoke with you this morning. It wasn't a question. She did. And she told you about my father. Verity moved further into the room, stopping near a leather armchair. She told me how he died, and why you blame yourself. He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Do you think she's right? That I'm using this arrangement to hide from responsibility? I think, Verity said carefully, that grief doesn't follow a schedule, and that forcing yourself into a marriage you don't want won't honor your father's memory. It'll just create more unhappiness. He turned then, and she saw something raw in his expression, something that looked almost like gratitude. Rowena says you're refreshingly blunt. She means it as a compliment. And what do you mean it as? I haven't decided yet. He moved to his desk, picking up a small wrapped package. I wanted to give you this, a welcome gift of sorts, and an apology for dragging you into my family's complications. Verity took the package, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a slim leather volume, beautifully bound, the title stamped in gold, The Merchant of Venice. Shakespeare, she said, surprised. You mentioned wanting to establish a textile business. I thought you might appreciate a story about a merchant, even if the ending is complicated. His lips quirked slightly. My father loved Shakespeare. He used to read it aloud to us when we were children. I thought you might enjoy something from his collection. Verity ran her fingers over the leather binding, touched in a way she hadn't expected. Thank you. This is very kind. Don't mistake practicality for kindness. But his voice had softened. You're doing me a service. The least I can do is make your time here bearable. Is that what this is? Bearable? He met her eyes, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken tension. I'm not sure what this is, Miss Mercer, but I'm beginning to suspect it's more complicated than either of us anticipated. The library door opened before she could respond, and Rowena's voice floated in. There you are. Cook wants to know about dinner preferences, and Grandmother is asking impossible questions about tomorrow's schedule, and she stopped, looking between them with sudden interest. Am I interrupting something? No, the Duke said, his expression closing like a door. Miss Mercer was just leaving. Verity clutched the Shakespeare to her chest and retreated, feeling his gaze on her back until she rounded the corner. That night, she read the entire play by candlelight and wondered what it meant that he'd given her a story about bargains, debts, and the unexpected price of getting exactly what you asked for. The days that followed established a rhythm that Verity hadn't anticipated. Mornings brought dress fittings and lessons in etiquette, Rowena coaching her on which fork to use and how to address various ranks of nobility, and the subtle art of saying absolutely nothing while appearing engaged in conversation. Afternoons brought callers, curious society women who appeared at Ashworth House under thin pretenses, clearly hoping to glimpse the wild American everyone was whispering about. Verity received them with careful politeness, wearing borrowed gowns that Madame Fontaine had sent ahead while the custom pieces were being finished. She answered questions about Boston, about America, about her friendship with Lady Rowena, all while aware that every word would be reported, analyzed, and probably twisted beyond recognition by evening. The Duke remained largely absent during these social calls, appearing only for meals and disappearing afterward into his study or the library. But Verity began to notice him watching her during those brief intersections. A glance across the dinner table, a momentary pause when they passed in corridors. Something assessing in his expression that she couldn't quite interpret. On the 5th day, she found him in the library again. She'd come looking for something to read. The Shakespeare he'd given her had awakened a hunger for more, and stopped in the doorway when she realized she wasn't alone. He sat in one of the leather chairs by the fire, a book open on his knee, though his eyes were fixed on the flames rather than the page. He looked tired, Verity realized, the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. "I can come back," she said softly. He startled slightly, as if he'd been very far away. "No. Stay." He gestured toward the shelves. "You're welcome to anything here. Father believed books should be read, not preserved behind glass." Verity entered slowly, trailing her fingers along the spines as she'd seen him do. "He had excellent taste. I've been eyeing that collection of maritime histories for days. Take it. Take whatever you like." He closed his own book, watching her. "Rowena tells me you've been handling the callers admirably. Lady Marchmont was apparently quite impressed by your composure." Lady Marchmont asked if Americans eat with their hands. I managed not to throw my teacup at her. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "That does require admirable restraint." "I've had practice." Verity pulled a volume from the shelf, a history of textile trade in the East Indies, and settled into the chair across from his. "My father used to bring me to merchant meetings when I was young. Men who thought a girl had no business understanding commerce. I learned to smile while being underestimated. And then I'd help Father negotiate contracts that made them look like fools." She smiled at the memory. "He said my greatest weapon was that no one expected me to be dangerous." The Duke studied her with renewed interest. "You miss him?" "Every day." She opened the book but didn't read it, running her fingers over the pages instead. "He died 2 years ago. Heart failure, the doctors said. But I think it was really shame, watching everything he'd built collapse, knowing he couldn't protect us. It broke something in him. I'm sorry. Don't be. He wouldn't want pity." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "He'd want me to rebuild, to take what I learned and make something new from the ashes. That's why I'm here. Not for marriage or social standing, for opportunity. You really aren't like other women, are you?" "I'm not sure that's a compliment. It's an observation." He leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees, his gaze intent. "Most women in your position would be calculating how to extend this arrangement, how to transform a fake courtship into a real one. You genuinely want nothing more than business connections?" "What I want," Verity said carefully, "is to never be dependent on anyone else's whims again. Marriage means giving up control. It means trusting someone with your future, your security, Your very survival. I've seen what happens when that trust is broken. I won't put myself in that position. That sounds lonely. It sounds practical. He was quiet for a moment, firelight playing across his features. My mother was practical once. Before she met my father, she had plans. Modest plans. Realistic plans. A quiet life. A comfortable marriage to someone safe. Then she met a duke who made her laugh, and all her practicality vanished. Did she regret it? Never. Not once, even when the ton whispered about her unsuitability, even when my grandmother made her life difficult for years. His voice softened. She used to say that love wasn't practical, but neither was happiness. You couldn't plan for either one. You could only recognize them when they appeared and have the courage to grasp them. That sounds like a fairy tale. Perhaps. He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him younger, warmer, and almost approachable. She would have liked you, I think. Another unsuitable woman with too much spine for polite society. Verity felt warmth bloom in her chest unexpectedly. You don't talk about her much, or your father. No. The smile faded. Talking about them makes them feel more gone. As long as I keep them locked away, I can pretend they're just elsewhere. Still existing somewhere, even if I can't reach them. That's not healthy. Probably not. He rose, moving to the window where the last light of evening painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. My grandmother believes I'm hiding from life, using grief as an excuse to avoid responsibility. She's probably right. Or, Verity said, echoing her words from the conservatory, you're simply not ready yet. He turned to look at her, something unguarded in his expression. You're very generous with understanding you don't owe me. We have an arrangement. Understanding seems like the minimum requirement for it to work. Is that all it is? An arrangement? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications she wasn't sure she was ready to examine. Before she could respond, he shook his head. Forgive me. That was inappropriate. We should maintain proper boundaries. Should we? The words escaped before she could stop them, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. Surprise, and something else. Something that sent electricity crackling through the space between them. Miss Mercer, Verity. She stood, closing the distance between them until only a few feet separated them. If we're going to convince all of London that you're courting me, you should probably use my name, at least in private. Verity. He said it slowly, as if testing the shape of it on his tongue. It suits you. Truth. Honesty. My mother's choice. She believed in speaking plainly. A radical concept among the English aristocracy. Hence my reputation as the wild American. She smiled despite herself. Perhaps I should embrace it. Give them something truly scandalous to talk about. Please don't. But he was almost smiling again. My grandmother's constitution couldn't take it. They stood there in the fading light, closer than propriety allowed, suspended in a moment that felt significant in ways Verity couldn't articulate. She was aware of his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his eyes had darkened to something like midnight blue in the shadows. I should go, she said, though she didn't move. Dinner will be soon. Yes. He didn't move either. You should go. Neither of them moved. This is dangerous, she whispered. Yes, he agreed. It is. The library door opened with a soft creak, and they sprang apart like guilty children. A footman stood in the doorway, carefully not reacting to whatever he'd seen or assumed. Dinner is served, Your Grace. Miss Mercer? The Duke nodded curtly. Thank you, Hopkins. We'll be there momentarily. The footman withdrew. Verity took a breath, steadying herself. We should, yes. This doesn't change anything. No. But his eyes told a different story. Nothing at all. They walked to dinner in silence, maintaining proper distance, speaking only of inconsequential things when Rowena demanded attention. But Verity felt the weight of his gaze throughout the meal. And afterward, alone in her amber room, she pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart beating far too fast for a woman who'd sworn off fairy tales. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction, an arrangement, a temporary alliance for mutual benefit. So why did it feel like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing she was about to fall? The Marchmont Ball was considered the true opening of the London season, the event where reputations were made, alliances forged, and futures determined in the space of a single evening. Verity understood this intellectually, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. The Marchmont townhouse blazed with light, hundreds of candles reflected in crystal chandeliers, their glow spilling onto the street below, where carriages queued for nearly an hour. Inside, the crush of bodies was overwhelming. Silks and satins in every color, jewels glittering at throats and wrists, the mingled scents of perfume and pomade, and perspiration barely masked by the hothouse flowers arranged on every surface. Verity stood at the top of the grand staircase, waiting to be announced, and felt her courage wavering. The gown Madame Fontaine had delivered that afternoon was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk, cut to emphasize her figure, while remaining just within the bounds of propriety. Her hair had been arranged by Nell in an elaborate style, threaded with sapphires borrowed from Rowena. She looked, for the first time in her life, like she belonged in a room like this, but looks, she knew, would only carry her so far. "Breathe," the Duke murmured beside her. His hand rested at the small of her back, warm through the silk. "They can smell fear. That's comforting." It wasn't meant to be, but his lips quirked slightly. "You look stunning, by the way. Every woman in this room will hate you within the hour." Also comforting. "The Duke of Thornfield," the major domo announced, his voice carrying over the crowd below, "and Miss Verity Mercer." Every head turned. The whispers began immediately, a susurrus of speculation that swept through the ballroom like wind through wheat. Verity lifted her chin and descended the stairs on the Duke's arm, acutely aware of the eyes tracking their every movement. The wild American. She could almost hear the words being spoken, see them formed on painted lips and hidden behind fluttering fans. The American girl who'd been discovered in a compromising position with the Duke. The nobody from Boston who'd somehow captured Thornfield's attention. The upstart who dared to insert herself into their exclusive world. Let them whisper. She was here. She wasn't leaving, and she would give them nothing to use against her. The first hour passed in a blur of introductions and careful conversation. Rowena stayed close, providing whispered commentary about the various guests, who was allied with whom, which families were feuding, whose daughter had been caught in a scandal last season and never recovered. The Dowager Duchess circulated separately, her expression revealing nothing as she received condolences and congratulations in equal measure. Whatever her private feelings about Verity's presence, she presented a united front to society. And through it all, the Duke remained at Verity's side. He danced the first waltz with her, as expected, a public declaration of his interest that set tongues wagging anew. His hand at her waist was correct, his movements precise, but Verity felt the tension thrumming beneath his controlled exterior. "Everyone is staring," she said quietly. "Let them." His eyes never left her face. "They'll talk regardless. Better to give them something definitive to discuss. And what are we telling them, exactly?" "That I've chosen you." The words were simple, but something in his voice made her breath falter. "Whatever they believe about your suitability or my sanity, they'll see that this is not a passing fancy, that you have my protection and my attention." "Your protection," she repeated. "Is that what this is?" Before he could answer, The waltz ended. They separated with proper formality, but his fingers lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. The second hour brought champagne and conversation, and the growing sense that she was being watched by someone specific. Verity felt the weight of hostile attention, like a physical pressure, and when she finally identified its source, her stomach dropped. Lady Lavinia Pembroke was beautiful in the way that expensive things were beautiful. Flawless, polished, designed to be admired. Her gown was pale rose silk, her blonde hair arranged in perfect ringlets, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. She approached during a lull in conversation, her expression pleasant and her eyes cold. "Miss Mercer," she said, curtsying with exaggerated politeness. "How delightful to finally meet the woman everyone's talking about." "Lady Lavinia," Verity returned the curtsy, matching her tone. "Your reputation precedes you." "As does yours." Lavinia's smile widened. "The wild American." Such a charming epithet, though I imagine it must be difficult, navigating society without proper guidance. So many rules to remember, so many ways to stumble. "I appreciate your concern, though I've found the rules less complicated than some suggest. Kindness, honesty, treating others with respect. These seem fairly universal." Something flickered in Lavinia's eyes. How refreshingly naive. In America, perhaps such simplicity suffices. Here, things are rather more nuanced. "Nuanced," Verity repeated. "Is that what you call it when someone smiles at you while calculating how best to destroy you?" The directness caught Lavinia off guard. Her composure faltered for just a moment before smoothing back into place. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "I'm sure you do." Verity kept her voice pleasant, aware that they were being watched. "But I appreciate the warning, Lady Lavinia. It's helpful to know exactly where one stands." "Where you stand," Lavinia said softly, stepping closer, "is on borrowed ground, wearing borrowed jewels, playing a borrowed role. When the Duke tires of his little rebellion, you'll return to whatever backwater you crawled from, and I'll still be here." "Perhaps," Verity smiled, channeling every lesson her father had taught her about negotiating with people who underestimated her. "But until then, I intend to enjoy every moment. If you'll excuse me, I believe His Grace is looking for me." She walked away before Lavinia could respond, her pulse quickening, her hands trembling slightly beneath her gloves. The Duke intercepted her near the refreshment table, his expression concerned. "I saw you speaking with Lady Lavinia. She wanted to welcome me to London society, very graciously. You're shaking." "I'm fine." She accepted the glass of champagne he offered, taking a steadying sip. "She's not the first woman to threaten me, and she won't be the last. I can handle Lady Lavinia Pembroke." "I have no doubt." His voice softened. "But you shouldn't have to. This was my scheme, my burden to bear. I never intended for you to become a target. I became a target the moment I stumbled onto your balcony. There's no undoing it now, only moving forward." He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Dance with me again. That would be improper. 2 waltzes in one evening. I don't care about propriety." He set down his glass, offering his hand. "Dance with me, Verity." The use of her name, here, in public, sent a shock through her system. She took his hand. This waltz was different from the first. He held her closer than strictly proper, his thumb tracing small circles on her waist through the silk. His eyes never left hers, and Verity felt the room fade away until there was only the music and his presence and the dangerous electricity building between them. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "I don't know." His voice was rough. "But I can't seem to stop." "Caius, don't." He pulled her fractionally closer. "Don't remind me why this is a terrible idea. I'm aware. I've been aware since the moment you took my hand on that balcony, but being aware doesn't seem to matter anymore." The waltz ended. They stood frozen for a moment, breathing hard, before propriety reasserted itself and they stepped apart. The whispers around them had reached a fever pitch. "Come with me," he said. "There's a terrace. We need to talk." She shouldn't. Every rational instinct screamed that this was a mistake, that private conversations led to complications she couldn't afford. But she followed him anyway, through a doorway half hidden by potted palms, onto a terrace overlooking the Marchmont Gardens. The night air was cool against her flushed skin. Stars scattered overhead, competing with the glow of London's gaslights. "I need to tell you something," Kaya said, turning to face her. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." "What?" "When I proposed this arrangement, I told you it was about escaping my grandmother's matchmaking. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." He drew a deep breath. "I chose you specifically, Verity. Not because you were convenient, but because you were different. Because you looked at me like I was a problem to solve, not a prize to win. Because you challenged me and negotiated with me and refused to be intimidated. I don't understand. I think I might be falling in love with you." The words came out rushed, almost desperate. "I know that wasn't part of the arrangement. I know you came here for opportunity, not romance, but I can't pretend anymore. I can't stand beside you and dance with you and watch you face down women like Lavinia Pembroke and feel nothing." Verity's chest constricted. "Caius, you don't have to say anything. I'm not asking you to return my feelings. I'm just—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "I needed you to know. Before this goes any further. Before I lose my nerve entirely." She should say something sensible. Something about arrangements and boundaries, and the impossibility of a future between a duke and a merchant's daughter. Something that would protect them both from the heartbreak she could see looming on the horizon. Instead, she stepped forward, rose on her toes, and kissed him. He froze for just a moment. Surprise, disbelief. And then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, his forehead pressed to hers. She whispered, "I think I might be falling in love with you too." His smile was radiant, transformative, the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Then light spilled onto the terrace as the doors burst open, and Lady Lavinia Pembroke's voice rang out like a bell. "Well, well, it seems the wild American truly does live up to her reputation." Behind her, a crowd was gathering, matrons and lords and the Dowager Duchess herself, her face frozen in horror. And Verity realized, with sickening clarity, that everything was about to fall apart. The morning after the Marchmont ball, Verity packed her belongings. She moved mechanically, folding gowns she hadn't paid for, setting aside jewels that had never been hers. Nell watched with tearful confusion, offering help that Verity gently refused. "Please, miss," Nell said, wringing her hands. "At least wait for his grace to return. He's been looking for you since Lady Lavinia announced to half of London that she'd caught us in a compromising position." Verity's voice was steady, but something fractured beneath the surface. "Since the Dowager Duchess looked at me like I'd single-handedly destroyed her family's reputation? I don't think waiting will help Nell." The previous night had descended into chaos. Lady Lavinia's triumphant announcement had drawn gasps and whispers that would fuel gossip for weeks. The Duke had tried to explain, to defend, to spin the moment into something acceptable. But the damage was done. The wild American, seducing respectable English nobility on terraces. The schemer, trapping a grieving duke with calculated intimacy. The fortune hunter, proving everything society had suspected about her from the beginning. The dowager had said nothing during the carriage ride home. That silence had been worse than any lecture. And this morning, Verity had made her decision. "This was always temporary," she said, more to herself than to Nell. I lost sight of that. I let myself believe in something that was never real. "But miss, His Grace will recover." Verity closed her valise with firm hands. "He's a duke. In 6 months, this will be a minor scandal. In a year, it'll be forgotten entirely. He'll marry someone suitable, produce heirs, and fulfill his duties. And I'll return to Boston with a valuable lesson about the dangers of fairy tales." A knock interrupted them. Verity's heart leapt traitorously, but it was only Rowena, her face blotchy from crying. "You can't leave," Rowena said, rushing forward to grip her hands. "Please, Verity, this isn't fair. Lavinia orchestrated that entire scene. She followed you deliberately, brought witnesses specifically to cause maximum damage. Caius is beside himself. He's been trying to see you since dawn, but you keep refusing because there's nothing to say." Verity squeezed Rowena's hands gently. "Your brother is a good man, but good intentions don't change reality. I don't belong in his world, Rowena. Last night proved that. Every person in that ballroom looked at me and saw exactly what Lady Lavinia wanted them to see. An ambitious outsider who'd overreached. They're wrong. Are they?" Verity released her, stepping back. "I came here for opportunity. Instead, I developed feelings for someone I can never have. I let myself dream of things that were never meant for me. That's my fault, not yours, not your brother's. But staying will only make it worse. At least talk to him, please. He deserves to hear this from you directly." Verity hesitated. Rowena's eyes were desperate, pleading, and she realized that refusing would be cowardly. Whatever else she wasn't a coward. "Fine," she said quietly. "One conversation. And then I'm leaving." The library felt different in morning light, less intimate, more exposed. The Duke stood by the window, his back to her, his posture rigid with tension. "You're really leaving?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." He turned, and Verity's chest ached at the devastation in his face. He looked like he hadn't slept, his clothes slightly disheveled, his eyes dark with something that might have been anger or grief or both. Because of what Lavinia did? Because of what society thinks? Because of what's true? She forced her voice to remain steady. "I'm a merchant's daughter from Boston. You're a duke. Last night, you kissed me, and I let myself forget what that means. But I can't forget anymore. What if I don't care about any of that? Then you're not thinking clearly." She wrapped her arms around herself, holding herself together by force of will. "Your grandmother was right. I'm not suitable. I never was. And letting myself believe otherwise was the worst mistake I've made in a long time. My grandmother said many things, not all of them true. She said I'd give you hope, and then abandon you when something better appeared." Verity's voice wavered. "She was half right. I'm abandoning you, but not because something better appeared, because staying would destroy us both." The Duke moved toward her, close enough to touch, but not touching. "Last night, you said you were falling in love with me. I was. I am." The admission cost her everything. "But love isn't enough. You need a wife who can navigate this world without causing scandals. Someone who understands the rules, who can support your position, who won't be a liability every time she opens her mouth. I don't want someone who follows rules. I want you. You want the fantasy, the romance of the unsuitable girl who captured the Duke's heart. But fantasies end, Caius. Reality is what comes after. And reality is Lady Lavinia Pembroke crowing about my disgrace to everyone who will listen. Reality is your grandmother's silence, which speaks louder than any lecture. Reality is that every choice you make from now on will be shadowed by the American scandal. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the Shakespeare he'd given her. The Merchant of Venice, with its stories of bargains and debts and prices that came due. I can't take this. It was a gift. It was a promise of something that can't happen. She pressed it into his hands. Thank you for everything. The gowns, the connections, the chance to see this world. I'll treasure the memories of these weeks. But I have to go before I make things worse. She turned toward the door. His voice stopped her. Verity, don't do this. It's already done. She didn't turn around. Couldn't. Goodbye, Your Grace. She walked out of the library, out of Ashworth House, into a waiting carriage that Rowena had arranged despite her protests. Through the window, she saw the Duke appear in the doorway, his hand raised as if to call her back. She looked away. London disappeared behind her, then the English countryside, blurring through tears she couldn't stop. By the time she reached the coaching inn where she'd spend the night before continuing to the coast, she was empty. No more tears. No more hope. Only the dull ache of something that might have been, and never would be again. She'd done the right thing, protected him from herself, protected herself from a heartbreak that would only grow worse with time. So why did it feel like she'd cut out her own heart and left it bleeding on the library floor? The innkeeper's wife brought soup she didn't eat, and tea she didn't taste. Verity sat by the window, watching darkness fall, and tried to imagine the future waiting for her in Boston. The modest house, the worried mother, the brother who meant well but never quite succeeded. The textile business she might someday build if she could find investors who'd take a chance on a woman. It had seemed like enough before. Now it seemed like a prison. A commotion in the courtyard made her look up. Horses, lanterns. A voice raised in urgent inquiry. She couldn't make out the words, but something about the tone made her heart stutter. Footsteps on the stairs. Fast, determined, 2 at a time. A knock on her door, sharp, insistent. Verity. His voice. Here. How? She rose on unsteady legs, crossing to the door, opening it with trembling hands. Caius stood in the narrow hallway, breathing hard, his coat dusty from the road, his eyes wild with something that looked like desperation and hope and fury combined. You left, he said. I explained why. You left, he repeated, without letting me finish, without giving me a chance to fight for you, without understanding that I don't care about scandals or suitability or any of the things you think matter. They do matter. They matter to society. They don't matter to me. He stepped forward, filling the doorway, his presence overwhelming in the small space. My mother wasn't suitable. My father married her anyway, and they were happy, deliriously, annoyingly happy, until the day she died. My grandmother told me once that she regretted opposing that match, that love was worth more than suitability. Your grandmother also threatened to destroy me. My grandmother says a lot of things. Not all of them reflect what she truly believes. He reached for her hands, gripping them tightly. I've been to 3 coaching inns tonight searching for you. The innkeeper's wife told me you'd taken a room. I nearly tore the door off its hinges. Despite everything, a small laugh escaped her. That seems excessive. Nothing is excessive when it comes to you. His voice softened. Come back, Verity. Not because of arrangements or schemes or mutual benefit. Come back because I love you. Because I can't imagine facing the rest of my life without you in it. Because you make me brave enough to choose happiness over duty. The scandal will fade. Scandals always do. But losing you would be permanent. His voice grew rough with emotion. I've already lost my mother, my father. I spent 6 months drowning in guilt, refusing to feel anything because feeling meant acknowledging the loss. And then you crashed into my life, and suddenly I wanted to feel again. Suddenly, the world had color and possibility and hope. Tears blurred her vision. I can't. Yes, you can. He lifted her hands to his lips. Come back. Face society with me. Let them whisper about the wild American who captured the Duke. Let them watch us dance and laugh and refuse to be diminished by their judgment. Choose this, Verity. Choose us. Your grandmother will never accept me. Then we'll win her over. Together. He smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. You're a survivor, remember? A negotiator. A woman who smiles while being underestimated. If anyone can conquer the Dowager Duchess, it's you. Verity laughed despite herself, a sound somewhere between a sob and genuine amusement. You're impossible. I'm determined. There's a difference. She looked at him. This man who'd ridden through the night to find her, who stood before her with his heart exposed, asking her to take a leap she was terrified to make. And she realized that the alternative, returning to Boston, living safely, never knowing what might have been, was worse than any scandal society could produce. If I come back, she said slowly, I have conditions. His smile widened. I would expect nothing less. They arrived at Ashworth House the following evening, exhausted but united. Rowena met them in the entrance hall, throwing her arms around Verity with a cry of joy that echoed off the marble floors. You came back. I knew you would. I knew Caius would convince you. He was persuasive, Verity admitted, returning the embrace. But there's still work to be done. Starting with grandmother, Rowena said, her expression sobering. She's been in the conservatory all day, hasn't spoken to anyone since you left. The Duke, Caius, she reminded herself. She was allowed to use his name now, squeezed her hand. Together? Together? The conservatory felt smaller than Verity remembered, its glass walls trapping the fading evening light. The Dowager Duchess sat motionless among the tropical plants, her embroidery untouched in her lap, her gaze fixed on nothing. She didn't look up when they entered. You brought her back, she said flatly. I expected as much. Grandmother. Don't. The Dowager rose with the careful dignity of someone refusing to show weakness. I warned you, Miss Mercer. I told you exactly what would happen if you hurt him. And yet, here we are, 2 days after your scandalous behavior destroyed months of careful reputation management. With respect, Your Grace, I didn't destroy anything. Lady Lavinia orchestrated. Lady Lavinia saw an opportunity and seized it, as any intelligent woman would. The Dowager turned to face them, her expression carved from ice. The question is not who caused the scandal. The question is what happens now. What happens now, Caius said firmly, is that I marry Verity, with your blessing or without it. Silence fell like a blade. Marry, the Dowager repeated. You intend to marry this woman. This unsuitable, untitled, American woman who has been in London for less than a month and has already created more scandal than the entire previous season combined. Yes. Have you lost your mind entirely? No. For the first time in months, I've found it. Caius stepped forward, his voice steady. You've been telling me to live again, grandmother, to feel something beyond duty and grief. Well, I'm feeling something. I love her, and I won't apologize for it. Love. The Dowager spat the word like a curse. Your father loved your mother, and look where it left him. Alone for 20 years, pining after a ghost. You want to follow that path? Throw away your position for a woman who can offer you nothing but scandal? He also spent 20 years surrounded by memories of happiness, Caius countered. Of joy, of something real. If I marry Lady Lavinia, what will I have? A suitable wife who bores me, children raised in a cold household, a life of propriety and emptiness. He shook his head. I'd rather have 20 years of genuine love than a lifetime of acceptable misery. The dowager's mask cracked slightly. Beneath it, Verity glimpsed something that looked almost like anguish. You think I don't understand love? You think I opposed your mother because I didn't care about your father's happiness? Her voice trembled. I opposed her because I knew what losing her would cost him. And I was right. Her death broke him. He was never the same afterward. I watched my son spend 2 decades as a shadow of himself, and I will not. She broke off, pressing a hand to her chest. I will not watch my grandson suffer the same fate. Understanding crashed over Verity like a wave. The dowager wasn't cruel. She was terrified. Terrified of watching someone she loved destroy himself for an unsuitable match, just as her son had done. Your Grace, Verity said softly, stepping forward. May I speak? The dowager's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her expression remained hard. I doubt I could stop you. You're right to be afraid. You're right that society will mock us, that the road ahead will be difficult, that there are no guarantees. Verity took a breath. But you're wrong about me offering nothing. And what, precisely, do you offer? Everything I have. The words came from somewhere deep within her. I offer a woman who will never let him retreat into grief, who will challenge him and argue with him and refuse to let him hide from life. I offer someone who understands loss because I've lived it, who knows that the alternative to risking your heart is never truly living at all. She stepped closer, close enough to see the moisture gathering in the dowager's eyes. I offer someone who loves your grandson, not his title, not his wealth, not his position. Him. The man who reads Shakespeare by firelight and carries his father's guilt like a stone around his neck and pretends he doesn't feel things because feeling is terrifying. Her voice trembled slightly. I offer him everything I am and everything I'll ever be. And if that's not enough for society, then society can go hang. The dowager stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, she laughed. It was a broken sound, half sob and half genuine amusement, and it transformed her severe face into something almost vulnerable. You really are like his mother, she said finally. The same foolish boldness, the same absolute certainty, the same willingness to tell a duchess to go hang. I didn't mean, yes, you did, and I respect you for it. The dowager moved to a chair, sinking into it as if the fight had drained from her entirely. I've spent so long trying to protect this family that I forgot what I was protecting it for. Duty, respectability, proper matches. None of it brought happiness. None of it filled this house with anything but silence. Caius moved to her side, kneeling before her chair. Grandmother, your father would have liked her. The dowager reached out, touching his cheek with trembling fingers. He always said I was too practical, too focused on what should be instead of what could be. She looked at Verity. He said love wasn't practical, but neither was happiness. I know, Caius said softly. He wrote it in a letter. I found it after he died. Of course he did. He was always better at writing than speaking. The dowager closed her eyes briefly. I won't pretend to approve entirely. You'll face opposition from every corner of society. Lady Lavinia's mother will make your lives difficult. The gossip will be relentless for at least a year. We know, Verity said, but the dowager opened her eyes, meeting Verity's gaze directly. If you're determined to do this, then we do it properly, publicly. We don't hide or apologize. or allow them to dictate the narrative. What do you mean? I mean the season isn't over, Miss Mercer. A ghost of the Dowager's old steel returned to her voice. There are 3 more balls before summer, and at the most important one, the Sinclair Ball, 2 weeks from now, you will make your debut as the future Duchess of Thornfield. Verity's breathing halted. You're giving us your blessing? I'm giving you a chance. The Dowager rose, straightening her spine with visible effort. Don't waste it. She swept from the conservatory, leaving Verity and Caius alone among the tropical plants. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Caius pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt his laughter rumbling through his chest. Did that just happen? He asked against her hair. Did my grandmother actually give us permission to be happy? I think she might have. Verity pulled back, smiling up at him. Though she also essentially declared war on the entire ton on our behalf. That sounds like her. He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips, softly, reverently, as if she were something precious. 2 weeks until the Sinclair Ball. Are you ready? No. She laughed, the sound bright with joy. But I've never been ready for anything that's happened since I met you. That doesn't seem to matter. Then we face it together, whatever comes. Together, she agreed. And for the first time since stepping off the ship in London, Verity believed that everything might actually be all right. The Sinclair Ball was the culmination of the London season, the event where fortunes were made, engagements announced, and the social order reaffirmed for another year. Every important family attended. Every important person watched. Tonight, they would all watch Verity. The gown Madame Fontaine had created for this moment was ivory silk with gold embroidery, designed to make a statement without shouting. Elegant, refined, unmistakably expensive. The sapphires at her throat and wrists were no longer borrowed. Caius had presented them to her that morning, a betrothal gift that had made her cry. Ready? Rowena asked, bouncing with barely contained excitement. No, Verity admitted, but let's do it anyway. They descended the grand staircase of Sinclair House together, Verity on the Duke's arm, Rowena and the Dowager following behind. The majordomo's voice rang out across the ballroom. The Duke of Thornfield, the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield, Lady Rowena Ashworth, and Miss Verity Mercer. Every head turned. The whispers began immediately, but this time Verity was ready. She lifted her chin, smiled, and descended into the dragon's den as if she owned it. The first hour was a carefully orchestrated campaign. The Dowager introduced her to allies, powerful matrons who owed the Ashworth family favors, lords who respected the late Duke and transferred that respect to his son. Rowena circulated among the younger set, countering gossip with enthusiasm and pointed observations about Lady Lavinia's questionable behavior. And Caius never left her side. They danced 3 times, ignoring propriety entirely. They stood together during conversations, his hand at her back, her fingers occasionally brushing his. They presented a united front that slowly, gradually, began to shift the room's energy. Lady Lavinia watched from across the ballroom, her expression murderous. Lord Bramwell, Verity noticed, was conspicuously absent. She'd learned from Rowena that he'd been quietly encouraged to spend the remainder of the season at his country estate, after the Duke made certain inquiries about his behavior toward unaccompanied women. Justice, it seemed, could be subtle. She's going to do something, Verity murmured, her gaze returning to Lavinia. I can feel it. Let her try. Caius's voice was calm. Whatever happens, we face it together. The moment came during the supper break. Lady Lavinia swept toward them with a cluster of allies, her smile sharp as a blade. Your Grace. Miss Mercer, what a delightful surprise to see you here. I would have thought, after recent events, discretion might be wiser. Discretion is for those with something to hide, Caius replied coolly. We hide nothing. How refreshing. Though I wonder if Miss Mercer's family in Boston would agree. I understand her brother has quite the reputation for failed schemes, and her father's business collapsed under rather suspicious circumstances. Verity felt the blow land. Lavinia had done her research, but before she could respond, Caius stepped forward. Lady Lavinia, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. I have tolerated your scheming, your manipulation, and your cruelty because I believed it beneath my dignity to respond. But insulting the woman I love is something I cannot and will not ignore. The room grew still, every eye fixed on them. The woman I love, he repeated, is braver than anyone in this room. She crossed an ocean to save her family. She faced society's mockery with grace. She told a dowager duchess exactly what she thought, and won her respect. She is worth more than every so-called suitable match in England combined. He turned to Verity, taking her hands in his. I had planned to do this more privately, he said, his voice softening. But perhaps this is better. Let everyone see. Let everyone know. He dropped to one knee. The gasps echoed off crystal chandeliers. Verity Mercer. Wild American. The woman who crashed into my life on a balcony and made me want to live again. His eyes shone with emotion. Will you marry me? Not despite what society thinks, but regardless of it. Will you be my wife, my partner, my future? Verity's vision blurred with tears. Yes, she said. 1,000 times yes. He rose, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her in front of everyone. The room erupted. Some applauded. Some gasped. Lady Lavinia stormed away, her face crimson with rage. The Dowager Duchess watched with an expression that might have been pride. But Verity barely noticed any of it. She was too busy being kissed by the man she loved while all of London watched. 6 months later, Verity stood on a different balcony, this one at the Hampshire estate, overlooking gardens silvered by moonlight. The ball inside continued without them, guests celebrating the Duke and his new Duchess. But she'd needed a moment of quiet. Caius found her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Escaping your own celebration? Remembering how this all started. She leaned back against him. A balcony. A scandal. A man who saw an opportunity in chaos. A woman who was too stubborn to run from it. She smiled. They still call me the wild American, you know? I heard Lady Marchmont use the phrase tonight. Does it bother you? No. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. I've decided to consider it a compliment. After all, it took something wild to crack through your walls. Something unsuitable to make you remember how to live. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, soft and sweet. My grandmother says you've been a positive influence. Your grandmother says many things, not all of them true. He laughed, the sound warm and free, a sound she'd worked hard to earn and would never stop treasuring. I love you, Verity Ashworth. I love you too, Caius. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. Even when you're impossible. Even when society whispers. Even when everything seems uncertain. Especially then. Especially then. They stood together in the moonlight, the wild American and her Duke, and watched the stars wheel overhead. Behind them, the ball continued. Before them, a lifetime waited, and neither of them had ever been happier.